I'd like to call to order this meeting for the Public Works Committee for the City of Rapid City on Tuesday, September 12th, 2017. First order of business is roll call and determination of quorum. Brenda?
Drew?
Here.
Solomon? Modrick? Roberts? Nordstrom? We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next is the adoption of the agenda. Can I have a motion?
Second.
Motion by Nordstrom, second by Modrick. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Now is the time for general public comment, a time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the aldermen present. And I have a request from Dale Tech.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a guest in the audience today I'd like to introduce, Lieutenant Colonel Gary Moore with the 28th Civil Engineer Squadron of Ellsworth Air Force Base.
Could I interrupt you for just a second? Maybe we could have him go to the podium so at least he'd be seen on camera.
Right.
Thank you.
Hello.
Anyway, Lieutenant Colonel is spending some time with us today. His function out at Ellsworth is much like our Public Works Department, and so we'll be doing some touring of some Public Works facilities today. So,
Thank you for letting me be here. So excited to be here. I've only been here for a couple months and enjoying your city and appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership. All right, so with that, public comment is closed. Next, we're going to approve the minutes of August 29th, 2017. Could I hear a motion from Robert, second from Solomon? All in favor of approving the minutes for August 28th, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Madam Chair.
Sure.
Madam Chair, unless there is an item to be pulled, move to adopt the consent items 1 through 15.
I want to pull an item.
Pull an item.
Okay. Chair would like to pull item 14. Okay, so I need another motion for the approval of all the items with the exception of item 14.
I'll amend my motion to remove item 14 and approve the remainder of the consent calendar.
And I'm fine with that.
Okay, so it's Nordstrom and Roberts again. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We're on to item 14. Authorize staff to advertise for bids for Meadowbrook Golf Course veritable, I gotta make sure I got that right, veritable turbine variable speed drive pumping station project PR 17-6162, approximate cost $150,000. Ah, yes, and Mr. Biegler's already at the podium.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So I would like you to explain a little bit about this to myself and to anybody that's watching today. It seems to be kind of a big ticket item. And I think it addresses this, something that's kind of interesting and a little bit different for the Parks Department.
Thank you very much. The irrigation system at the Meadowbrook Golf Course actually pumps water out of a pond that is on site, and that pond is refilled with creek water. So there is no treated water that's going into irrigation of that facility, which is great. This pump is replacing another pump that was kind of original to that area when it was turned into an 18-hole course. So it is quite old and it is starting to see some wear, and so this is the reason for this purchase.
Thank you. That's enough of an explanation that I need, but I guess we've got some other questions here. So Chair recognizes John Roberts.
Thank you very much. Mr. Riegler, so this was an existing infrastructure that was out there already. This isn't something new that you're doing?
Correct.
And I was going to ask a question. I went completely blank. Oh, that's terrible. How long has it been since it's been upgraded?
Well, I think it's been at least 30 years, so it is. It's an old pump, and it gets a lot of use during the summer. That's a big course to have all the water go through this pump, so it does get a workout.
And I noticed that it was coming out of your CIP, so this has been
Correct.
built in for quite a while.
That's correct, yes.
You know, I want to say something about this because I think this is a great idea that we're doing this. 5 years ago, I chaired a committee for a watering committee, and we looked at doing this for Memorial Park. Unfortunately, we couldn't find the money to do it, but I just want to let the committee and the citizens know that if we'd have done it 5 years ago, it would have been paid for by now, and we'd be saving money. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Roberts. Next up is Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Move to approve the authorization to advertise.
Second.
Move to approve by Nordstrom, second by Solomon.
If I may.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff, just a couple of things, if you would explain the term veritable.
Oh, geez.
And then also, sorry, make sure we all understand what that means. And it's not variable. So the other one is water rights, how that affects our water rights, with this water being removed from Rabbit Creek and how that plays a role.
Perhaps our Public Works Director could tackle the water rights. I know that their water rights do play into us being able to draw out of that, out of the creek. As far as veritable, this is just what it's been called. It is a variable speed as well. So it's both veritable and variable. But it just allows a double function of being able to draw the water out of the creek when necessary to replenish the pond, and also act as a pump for actually delivering the irrigation throughout the course.
Thank you. And I also appreciate the initiative by staff to come up with alternative methods for watering the golf courses. So a good job. So if I may, Dale Tech, water rights.
I won't be able to give you a detailed description of the water rights. However, I believe that the City Parks Department is utilizing a water right that's owned by the city to draw water directly from the creek. So that would be a diversion point where our water rights typically dictate where you can draw water. So the water right that we have that the Parks Department is using is legal and has been in effect for quite some time.
I assume, and that's dangerous to assume, but would presume that it has to do with, we've been doing it for 30 years from this same location, and that would be the water right that we've had.
Correct.
For that 3 decades at least.
Yes, absolutely. The city's owned water rights for probably over a century. We have a consultant that we have on retainer that reviews our water rights to make sure that we're in compliance with them, not necessarily on an annual basis, but certainly every other year. So we want to make sure that we're fully in compliance with state water law and within our rights that we have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield.
All right, motion on the floor to approve. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? And it carries. Now we're on to the non-consent items, 16 through 19. And we do have a speaker request from Dane Boomsma. So, Dane, do you want to address this now? You can. Yeah, I mean, it's first up on our.
Second up.
Oh, second.
You want to wait until you're on 17, or?
Oh,
Your choice.
he's 17, excuse me, okay.
17.
We have some stuff to do with 16, so we'll just wait for a second. Okay. So with that, public comment is closed, and we'll talk to Mr. Boomsma when we get to the item. Okay, item 16 is the appeal of denied exception request from Chris Bro Hospitality, LLC, to waive the requirement to provide a traffic impact study per city IDCM section 2.17 traffic studies for a proposed True Hampton Inn and Suites Hotel located at Tract A, Rushmore Center subdivision. And this was continued from August 29th. Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to continue this item to the September 26th Public Works meeting per the applicant's request.
Motion by Solomon, second by Roberts, to continue this to, what was the date again?
September 26th, Madam Chair.
September 26th. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Now on to item 17, and that is to appeal of denied exception request from Dane Boomsma to allow connection to an existing non-conforming water service stub that runs parallel in the row, ROW, in front of an adjacent lot for a new single-family house. And so the chair recognizes Dane. Mr. Boomsma, if you'd like to go to the podium.
Dane Boomsma with Boom Construction. I purchased this lot, lot 22R-1. 22R indicating it's been a revised lot at some point since it was originally platted. That exact process, I don't know. When they did replat it, the lot line changed, I presume, by about 16 feet. The curb stop then was moved the 16 feet further to the west to be on lot 22R-1, which I now own. That was apparently okay at the time that it was done back in 2004 because it was inspected. The city has, the utility maintenance has the card on it that it was inspected and accepted as installed per the revised plat. I since have bought the lot, applied for a building permit, which arose this issue because the water service line does not tap the water main immediately in front of my lot, which I have a limited frontage because it is a flag lot. So that triggers me to have to abandon this infrastructure, which was put in 2001, to redo it, only to come into compliance with the new design criteria manual. I don't feel replacing this infrastructure is any benefit to any future consumer, nor the city. In fact, I think that it's a detriment because we would have to dig the street up, which adds an additional street patch into the street. And even though I'm liable for 2 years for warranty, we all know that the street patches are the first ones to get potholes. Not only that, I have to cross 6 or 7 private utilities, which anytime we're messing around any utilities, there's a risk for future down the road. All of this is to accomplish that we, black and white, meet the design criteria manual. Infrastructure in place is good. I'm already hooked up to the infrastructure in place. Moving it at this point in time would be a waste of resources and be a detriment to what the city's infrastructure currently has. We'd be abandoning a tap, so we're putting another tap on the water main. So now you have another point of a break at some point as the line ages. So I'm open to any questions you have.
Chair recognizes John Roberts.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to uphold the appeal. If I can get a second, I want to hold the floor for a minute.
Second. Motion by Roberts to uphold the appeal and second by Drew.
Thank you very much. Just give me a minute, Lisa, and you can have the floor. The reason I'm speaking on this, I know that area up there very well, and this is a very unique lot. Dane, can you tell me the size of this lot?
It's 8+ acres.
And one owner, there's no plans of subdividing it as far as I know anytime in the future?
There is not. We have a single owner that's purchasing the property. The building permits we've already obtained, subject to either me moving the water line or obtaining this exception.
And give me an idea, what would the cost be of moving this water line? The money that would just be flushed down the toilet?
I would say $6,000 to $8,000.
Yeah, so I know it's not like it's a very minimal cost. This is a cost that's got to be picked up by somebody, whether it's a homeowner, whether it's the builder. But
and ultimately, is the consumer's going to pick up that?
Oh, ultimately, the consumer is always the one that loses in the end, ultimately. But, I might have some issues with this if this lot was going to be subdivided into, 10 different lots, and they're going to be coming off a non-conforming tap. We do have non-conforming sewers, we have non-conforming water lines, we have non-conforming. The difference between this one and the majority of them that we have, and I'll give you good examples, West Boulevard, because we just redid one there last year. This infrastructure is only a few years old. It's going to last for a long, long time, compared to some of the infrastructure we have that's non-conforming that may be 50, 60, 70 plus years old. So, I think the pertinent thing to do on this is to uphold this variance because, we can't constantly be adding to all of our builders' costs in Rapid City and expect to have affordable homes. So, thank you.
Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions for staff, and I'm going to look to Dale Tech on this question. Mr. Tech, have you got some response to this? Because I'm looking at that, moving it, shall I say it's into that dog ear that's up there in that, off of this lot. How that affects going through several, you said how many utility lines?
There's 6 or 7 private utilities that run in the boulevard in front of all the lots, including mine.
So my question remains is that moving that connection several feet west to the closer to the cul-de-sac area, have you got a response for us on that?
Well, staff's position on this is to be consistent with our criteria manual. And the main reason that staff has recommended denial of this is this service line is located in the front of somebody else's property now. There's a home that exists there, so if this service line goes bad, the owner of this lot that Mr. Boomsma is developing or building on will be digging up in front of the neighbor's house. And
That's not true, Mr. Sir.
The curb stop is located just within inches or in the frontage where it turns in 90s and goes across the street is in front of somebody else's house.
That's correct, but whether I do it right now or if that utility aged and became a problem, you would still dig directly in front of this owner's lot. You would never dig up the old copper to salvage it. You would never dig up in front of that owner's lot. Whether I do it now or if it was done in 50 years, when the life expectancy or whenever that is, you would always just dig straight across the street at that time. You would never impede anything on the neighbor's lot. The water main is across the street, and so at the time you abandon it, you would dig up the water main to shut the corp off to disconnect it. But the water line that's there would remain in the ground, whether I do it or it's done in 50 years.
Thank you, Mr. Boomsma. Madam Chair, what I would like to do is get some more information about this, and if Mr. Boomsma has got some drawings on this, or someone has some drawings, because I haven't seen any specs on this location where the other utility lines are located. The what you mentioned as crossing the neighbor's yard or driveway or is adjacent to it, I need to see those drawings first before I can make a decision. Right now, I'm not going to support this decision based on, I'm not going to have enough information.
If I may, I might be able to shed a little light on that. In every street, you've got private utilities. You've got gas, you've got communication, you've got, those are going to be in every street. So there's no additional information really that Mr. Boomsma can provide you. What he says is true. There are private utilities up and down that street just as there are in any other street in Rapid City. I believe the point he's trying to make is he's going to have to contend with those private utilities if he has to make an adjustment to this line. And what I'll say is what he's saying about if he has to do it now or someone has to do it 50 years in the future, they're going to have to deal with those too. So really that, to me, is kind of an irrelevant point. Those utilities exist on all of our streets. That's just part of digging in the right-of-way. You're going to have to encounter those and make adjustments.
If you could, please clarify the point about the proposed water line by Mr. Boomsma going across that property. I'm seeing an L shape here.
Correct.
And going across into the neighbor's driveway. And if that line fails, there's another problem.
Potentially, yes. And as I discussed earlier, if there's a problem and there's a leak and it blows the neighbor's driveway out, then that's got to be repaired. And then the neighbor is upset. And we've had that issue, and that's the primary reason the criteria manual was changed back in 2012 to address issues just like this.
Thank you. And I know we've got comparable issues within the city already that have to deal with something very, very similar to this. So that's why I'm trying to avoid making sure we're not going into repeating of old history that we don't need to do. Thank you.
Chair recognizes City Attorney Joel Lundeen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that's just kind of what I wanted to touch upon. We have dealt with this issue, and there certainly are a lot of non-conforming lines, both water and sewer, around town. And so we've tried to clean those up when the problems have arose, but again, a lot of the comments at that time are, I wish they had done this the right way the first time rather than allow this to continue. One I'm thinking about, we had a sewer line where it was across somebody's backyard and the sewer line failed and it flooded the neighbor's basement who had the line across, didn't even realize he had a sewer line across his property, caused damage to his property. He could no longer get homeowner's insurance, and the city stepped in and actually did a project and paid money in order to help fix the situation by extending it so they could run their lines out 90 degrees. I haven't been able to see, looking at the item agenda, whether it really crosses the other person's property or not. But certainly if it does cross somebody else's property, that is the issue, because if at some point the line does fail, whether it's 50 years from now or not, somebody at some point is going to have to deal with it. And if it causes damage to somebody else's property, that's why the requirement in the specifications in the ordinance is that it run 90 degrees so it doesn't cross other people's property and it goes from the street into the property it's serving. If it doesn't, then you have a potential if it's crossing somebody else's property. Now, that isn't to say there aren't times for an exception, but again, I can't see whether it's crossing somebody else's property or not. But if it does, I would seriously question whether we should approve this, because at some point, if it fails, it's going to probably impact the neighboring property owner. And if it's 20 years from now or 30 or 50, they aren't even going to probably realize it's there because they weren't privy to this discussion or what's going on. So, you know, whether Mr. Booms was saying, well, we can solve it then, well, why not just solve it now? I mean, this is why we're having the discussion now. If it's going to have to be solved at some point, I guess the question is, why not solve it now rather than wait till it fails or in the future?
Thank you. Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I direct a question to Public Works Director, please?
Oh, yes.
So Dale, that's the heart of my question is will this cross someone else's property?
It does not cross somebody else's property. However, it is located in the public right-of-way right out in front of somebody's house.
So it could impact someone's property, but
Correct.
it's not directly on someone's property.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Lisa Modrick.
Thank you. Can I ask Mr. Busby a question?
Please.
Dane, have you had conversations with the neighbors there where you're getting ready to build this site?
We've had conversations because the sewer stub that was there had a similar thing done to it, that they had rerouted it to the west the 16 feet to get on the lot according to the city records. When we went to where the city marked it, there was no utility stub there. And so ultimately we thought, well, we'll chase it back and see if we can find it, consequently digging in the neighbor's yard. So at that time, we visited with him just to make sure it was okay. So he's aware that the utilities were there. We went all the way up to his concrete, which was 9 or 10 feet past our lot line into his lot line. We never found the sewer stub. So the sewer stub, we did have to go to into the street already and tap a new sewer main. So the exception is only for the water, not for the sewer. I just want to clarify that, and I think it reads that. But the sewer is a conforming sewer because there was no sewer stub there. Ultimately, I did have conversations with the neighbor, and he was, friendly enough and let us try to find a sewer stub, finding none.
I'm going to ask Dale a question if I can.
Oh, please.
So Dale, I see an advantage but also a disadvantage to abandoning and not allowing the tap to be included into this property on this small sliver. It's not a full zone development. It's a one home, single family home that's being developed on there. And, what are the pros and cons of an abandoned versus putting in that new tap, where we have a benefit with the abandonment by just ending that line?
Well, Joel spoke to it, as did I earlier. You've got a direct line then to this lot. It doesn't zigzag across the right-of-way and end up at the lot, and in the meantime is in front of somebody else's property, presumably under their driveway as well. As far as abandoning the tap on the main, that's done all the time. There are services that are adjusted and changed throughout our city, so As far as that being a negative, could it be a place that leaks in the future? Certainly. Any tap or abandonment of a tap is a potential for a leak on the water main, but that, we've got 20,000 of them across the city, and it's not a problem that we see regularly.
So we still have the, we could still end up with some water issues even on that abandoned tap that's sealed, as well as if we do put it to use on the non-conforming, because it just seems to me like we could hit it either way, is what you're saying, is we could still have a problem even if we abandon it.
My opinion is we'll have less of a problem by abandoning the existing service and installing a new one. At least for the neighbor, that'll be a much better condition for them.
What would make it better?
They won't have two service lines out in front of their property, and so they've doubled their chance of one of them failing and causing damage to their property.
If I could ask Dane another question then.
Of course.
Dane, when one of the questions was made by our council member here on board, did you have any other papers? I know our map it's not really clear and defined on where these are coming. Do you have anything you can put up for us, or you could hand us that can see it a little bit more defined on where that neighbor and that line is?
So
I think it's covered up.
Right. All I have is this is what you get from utility maintenance, and it's a one-page card, as they refer to it, that shows the distances from hydrants or manholes, etc. This gives the distances of where it was and then where they moved it. Pretty hard to interpret, but we could definitely put it up, and I could try to explain it.
Hard to interpret. Okay. Councilman Richie Nordstrom had said maybe the projector would help if you wouldn't mind. Would that help you?
I'm not sure, is it on?
Let's see if we can do that. And then in the meantime, maybe, think about your defined case here, because I think we're on the water line on this one, and we're really trying to figure out what the right thing is to do for all involved, for the neighbors, for the city, the criteria manual, and also for you, for putting another single-family home in, which we need. So I'm gonna, if I could, Madam Chair, allow him to give us some information?
That
Thank
seems
you.
fine.
Thank you.
I'll try to point here. Okay, so this little circle is the fire hydrant. That's their signal or symbol for a fire hydrant. Then it comes out of the fire hydrant. This line here is the water main. That right there are two dashes. That indicates the tap that's currently there. It comes south across the street, which is in front of the neighbor's lot. As far as parallel perpendicular, it's perpendicular right in front of the neighbor's lot. With the exact location, they moved it 16 feet, so I'm guessing that it does come over to the boulevard, a few feet probably underneath of his approach. Not his actual driveway that's on his property, but it probably does come underneath of his approach, I would guess. I don't know that exact. They then put the curb stop to this point. Those two, whatever symbols those are two curb stops. The one to the neighbor's house, the other one was to the old 22, lot 22, before they revised it. And then you can see they added this 16, you can read that 16. They took the one curb stop, the curb stops were 2.5 feet apart, probably lot lines split them, one on one side, one on the other side. They moved it to the west, that 16 feet, replaced that curb stop. You can kind of see this dash line here. That's probably indicating the new lot line, according to the inspector, just his rough drawing. There was a couple of notes on here. Down here it just says, curb stop moved 16 feet west by A1 of 04. So that was the city inspector that made that note. Obviously that was an approved method of correcting this at the time of this replat. Up here it says about the same thing. 1.5 feet inside of new property is what that note says up top there. So that was just indicating where that curb stop was. So when somebody like me comes along, they have some sort of record where to find it, because they get buried after 13 years. So
Thank you.
not a good map, but that's the information we
That's what
get
I
from
got.
the city.
Okay. Aye. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chair recognizes John Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at that, I don't know what you call it, card, where that is tapped off of the main line, comes down to the first stop, okay? That stop is that for the neighbor next to you, or?
The best I can figure by that drawing, they used a joint trench to bring both services across the road and ran in conjunction, the best I can figure.
So it's not one non-conforming line, there's two lines in that trench?
No, his would be conforming because it's in front of his
Well,
lot.
yeah, absolutely, but I mean, there's two lines in that one trench is what there is.
What I can figure, yes, based on the information I have.
Okay, so if a service line does fail, it may be his or it could be the other one, but, you know, okay, I was just curious because I was wondering if they were using one line and having a non-conforming line, because I've seen that happen too.
It's potential that we open up a whole nother ball of wax when we dig this up. That what you just described is what they did, and I cut the line and shut the corp off, and he calls the city and says, "Why don't I have water?"
Well, then the city
In
will be
01, we'd
paying
hope
for
that
it.
that didn't happen in 01. If this was done in the 70s, maybe, but still, that is a potential.
Okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you. Good discussion. You mind if I ask you a question? So for me, I think this boils down to, you know, I obviously want to make it as easy as possible to do business with the city without impacting the neighbors. So when Mr. Tech talks about how this might have an impact on the neighboring property, you know, do you have a response to that? Help me eliminate that question in my mind, I guess, if there is one, about if this could potentially have a negative impact on the neighbors in order to grant this variance.
I think that anytime you have a pressurized system of any kind, whether it's a gas line, water line, whatever it is, for sewer main, anytime you have a pressurized system, you have a chance that if you were to create a hole or a hole got it corroded into the line, that it's going to create some property damage, whether that's a settling in the boulevard, whatever it is. And so I think Mr. Tech's point was, you have two pressurized lines instead of one. So his point is probably accurate, that you do have two versus one. My point is, this is new infrastructure. This was accepted at the time of replat. There should be some consideration for the non-conforming line, because it was accepted by the city. We go off of a design criteria manual, which works great in all new construction aspects. Every single one of them we can about make work. But there's no variance in that criteria manual for any existing structure. There's nothing that says, there's no variance. It's black and white. This is the design criteria manual. So that's why I asked, this is fairly new infrastructure. It seems nonsense for me to abandon it. I also appreciate the fact that we're visiting here today. And you made a comment, Mr. Solomon, just now about doing business with the city. So when I applied for my building permit, if I make a few comments on that regard, I got a letter from Nicole in the engineering department. I appreciate more this week probably than most the fact that I can stand up here and talk to you guys freely. This is a week of remembrance, and so I think this is a good point to make, because I would not be in front of you guys without me pressing the city staff. And I'll prove this by this letter. You'll see the highlighted, well, you don't see highlighted up there, obviously, but if you scroll down through that second paragraph, it says the sewer service can either, one, means I would take that as option one, be abandoned at the main and new service constructed to the lot that fronts parcel per current standards. Or two, which I'd assume is option two, replat the property so that the existing service line is encompassed within the boundary. Three, obtain an easement from lot 21R. So I have three options by that letter. I went to Nicole and I said, this is all my options. This is it. Yep. I said, can I apply for a variance? Well, yes, you can apply for a variance. I said, okay, I would like to do that. And I said, who approves that? City staff. I said, okay. I said, and what if city staff doesn't approve it? Well, then you have to make it conforming. I said, that's it? Well, no, you can appeal to the council, or to the Public Works to the council. My point being, as a citizen and as a builder, my options should be laid out. She went through the time, and Nicole's great to work with. She answers all my questions. But if you're going to go through time and type me a letter, give me my accurate options that I have. Don't make me pry you all the time to get the information, just because ultimately staff does want the new line put in. That's what I felt in that situation. So just, you brought up the comment of working with the city. This is just an example that I don't have a bad taste in my mouth. It's just an example that maybe our city staff could help us as citizens and contractors a little bit better, giving us our true options we have and opportunities to be in front of all of you. So.
I yield. Thank you.
All right, the motion, as I remember it, is to grant the appeal of the denied exception request from Dane Boomsma. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Roll call, please.
Drew,
No.
Solomon, Modrick, Roberts, Nordstrom. 3-2. Passes.
Thank you. So this will go on to the council on Monday night, the full council, so please be back. And if you can, maybe some better visual aids would help your case tremendously. So thank you. All right, on to item number 18, Fifth and Main Street intersection safety improvements, and informational item only. I go to Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I direct a question either, I guess, to Dale Tech or Chief Jegaris? Do you want to talk a little bit about what this is for the public's understanding?
Okay.
One of you?
Yes, thanks, Alderman Solomon. Actually, Steve Fruman, the city traffic engineer, is here, and
Okay.
he is going to speak to the item, and then I believe the police chief may have some follow-up
Okay.
comments.
And then I'll have a follow-up question regarding pedestrian safety as well, just FYI. Mr. Freeman?
I'm Steve Fruman, city traffic engineer, like Dale said. At 5th Street and Main Street, right outside the building to the southeast, we will be modifying the northbound lanes on 5th Street. Currently, if you go out there, there's a left turn lane, there's a through lane, and there's a lane in between them that's either through or left turns. And then there's parking over to the right of that as you go up and down 5th Street. What we're going to be doing is taking those 4 lanes worth on the northbound side, and we'll be redoing them so that at Main Street, 5th Street has 2 left turn lanes and 2 through lanes going north. Historically, there's been a problem of people in that lane that's currently for left turns or going straight, stopping because they want to turn left and they have to wait for the southbound traffic in order to do that, and people behind them thinking that they're going to go straight, either slamming on their brakes, swerving at the last minute to go around them, every once in a while hitting them, every once in a while swerving and hitting the car in the other lane. So it's been a problem for a while. Earlier this year, Chief Yeageris brought it to our attention. We took a look at it, made sure of a few things, one of them being that we couldn't solve it just by taking that shared lane and making it through only, where there'd only be 1 left turn lane. We counted the traffic there. It's too busy of a left turn to really function well with just 1 left turn lane. It would start backing up onto 5th Street going south. So since we have that pavement there already, and it's really just a matter of changing some signs, changing the markings on the pavement, and changing a couple of signal heads, we are going to go ahead and take the parking lane that we have right now, use it for the through lane to go north so that we can take that shared lane and make it left turn only. So there'd be the 2 left turn lanes onto Main and the 2 through lanes.
Okay. I understand this is for informational purposes. We aren't here to make a decision, but one thing I thought about, and I appreciate the safety, I totally support this, by the way, but eliminating that parking means some folks might have to park in the parking garage or some other parking. So one of my questions or concerns is the pedestrian traffic crossing 5th Street. So we want to see more movement happening east of 5th Street. Right. And our downtown master plan has that kind of built in. And if we are repainting and restriping, I know one of the things talked about kind of for a wider cross area or some more I guess, creative ways to do it versus, building concrete structures or anything along those lines. So are we addressing at all the pedestrian crossing if we are going to remove that parking on Fifth Street?
Well, the crosswalk across Fifth Street on the north side of the intersection won't be changed any. And the distance from curb to curb obviously isn't going to change. Right now there are right turns on red allowed from Main Street onto Fifth Street, that northbound. Currently, people make that maneuver by turning around any vehicle that's parked there, as well as waiting for the pedestrian. I don't anticipate any impacts to pedestrians. If anything, it might make it a little smoother for them, since the car would be always turning right into the nearest lane, potentially at least, be able to do that, versus having to swing wide to avoid the parked cars and use that lane. But like I said, we're not going to be removing the crosswalk. We're not changing the pedestrian walk time, nothing like that. So there should be no real impact to pedestrians crossing Fifth Street.
Okay. I'm about out of time, but I just want to thank the staff for going forward with this recommendation. I know we lose a little bit of convenience for some folks, but in the interest of public safety, in this case, it is much needed, and I do appreciate you being proactive and informing us and the public about what's going on. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, if I may, to acknowledge this report.
Second.
Motion made to acknowledge by Nordstrom, second by Solomon. All in favor?
Oh, Madam Chair.
Oh, excuse me? What?
Further discussion? Just, if I
Oh,
may.
okay,
retain
I'm
the floor.
sorry, I went too quickly, okay. Okay, go ahead, Rich.
It happens. It happens. Mr. Moore, could you address the issues about the owners of these near the street that have that convenience of that parking? Granted, I understand they do not own the street, they don't own those parking lots, but have you visited with those folks yet?
Have not.
That's fine. Well, I'm just curious at this point, and I just wanted to add to the discussion. And then the other one, a question I have for you, will this affect, or does this take a role play with the downtown parking plan as well?
It's certainly information that, we'll pass along to the study group for the downtown parking plan, that the on-street parking on these 2 blocks of Fifth Street on the east side of the street have been removed. It's about 9 spaces worth. I went earlier this summer, and several times a day going by and counting how many cars were parked in each block. A lot of those spaces right now are not getting used during the weekdays, so that's part of why we feel confident about our ability to remove them without unduly having a negative impact on those businesses. And of course there will still be the parking in the deck. There will be the parking available on Main Street and on St. Joseph. No parking on the southbound side of Fifth Street is going to be affected. So it really is just those 9 spaces that, as far as I could tell, never more than about 5 or 6 cars at once ever used. So.
Okay, thank you for that information. And I know, again, just as part of the discussion phase of this process, and I applaud you for taking a look at it, because I do get involved with that traffic coming down here to City Hall. So I know I'm not the only one. So the other part of that discussion is, and I know this is not part of your plan, but are you aware of, as Mr. Solomon stated earlier, about the pedestrian crossing? Because it seems like Fifth Street itself is something of a barrier, a pedestrian barrier, if you will, to be more pedestrian friendly. And just for discussion purposes, looking at some way to enhance that pedestrian availability for removing that barrier.
Looks like the director wants to say something.
Okay, Dale Tech.
I guess I'll weigh in on this subject. The places for pedestrians to cross our roadways are at intersections. We have a very good system in the downtown with pedestrian crossings timed adequately for people to get across. There's not much you can do as far as engineering or enforcement to make people cross where it's safest.
Agreed.
I believe, though, that education is the best way to do that. So parents out there, if you're listening, cross at the crosswalks. To the users of our road system, don't walk across a multi-lane arterial road in the middle of the road. Use the crosswalks. It'll be a much safer condition for everyone involved. To all the business owners downtown, urge your customers to utilize our crosswalks. That's the safest place for pedestrians to cross. In addition to that, drivers out there, watch for pedestrians in crosswalks. That's where they are expected to be, and that's the safest place for them to cross. That's my educational outreach that I just performed for the community right there. And I think we all, as citizens of our community, need to pass that along.
And if I may be so bold as to ask Chief Jager as part of that education, I know we did a jaywalking program here some years ago. If you don't mind adding on to this point.
We continue to do enforcement regarding crosswalk-related violations, both for pedestrians and for vehicular traffic. So it's a two-way street is our phrase. It's both the pedestrian and the driver need to do what they're supposed to do, and it all works out just fine. As far as this specific intersection, it is a safe intersection to cross as long as you do so properly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield.
Thank you. If I could just add a few things too. I work at AB's Feed, or what is called Racing Magpie, right there on 5th Street. And it's the East of 5th project is working. I think that's a big feather in our cap. You know, we're getting people to go down to the statues that are across 5th. We're getting people to go to the businesses across 5th. So this will be an ongoing concern for the people on the council, because safety is first and foremost in our minds for the citizens that live here. So as we go into the future, when we do things that work, we also have to be prepared for that extra usage. So thank you for your work on this, and with that, I yield. Okay, so now I can do it. The motion's been made to acknowledge this discussion on the 5th Main Street intersection. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? And the acknowledgement is carried. All right, number 19. Ridgeview Place subdivision, appeal of staff's decision on a vacation of easement. And the chair recognizes Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to continue this to the September 26th Public Works meeting per the staff's request, if I can get a second.
Motion by Solomon to...
Don't cut him off.
Just for informational purposes, I believe the staff needs to gather more information so that they can make a better decision on this situation. So is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
I'm always good with more information. Okay, and sorry to cut you off there, Jason. Motion by Solomon and a second by Nordstrom to move this to September 26th. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? And motion carries. Motion to adjourn by Nordstrom, second by Solomon. All in favor?
Aye.
We stand in adjournment.